Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the House. House File 291 brings balance on behalf of locally elected representatives and the hardworking taxpayers of Iowa. The common sense reforms in this bill will result in a state government in Iowa that is more responsive and more efficient, creating the opportunity to reward good employees while more effectively dealing with those who are not meeting acceptable standards. It creates safeguards in the arbitration process to protect the Iowa taxpayer, accountability to members of public employee unions through the creation of elections, and removes the responsibility of dues collection from the union, for the union from the taxpayer and places it with the union. Under the current system that has not been reformed in over 40 years, the taxpayer is at a disadvantage. They are at a disadvantage because the current system requires an arbitrator to consider the state or local government's ability to raise taxes as a factor in the determination of the approval of pay and benefits packages for state employees, thus creating the potential that the heavy hand of government will plunge ever more deeply into taxpayer wallets. While requiring the arbitrator to consider the ability of state or local governments to raise taxes as a justification for approval of pay and benefit packages, this same system does not allow the arbitrator to consider the ability of the state or local government to afford the proposed increases, once again putting the taxpayer at a disadvantage. Furthermore, taxpayers are disadvantaged by the fact that the current system allows an arbitrator to impose a decision with no limits on the final cost, beyond whatever the top offer is that has been put forward. These factors reflect why it is essential that we reform the current system, and House File 291 does just that. It places a cap in the arbitration process of 3% or the Midwest Consumer Price Index, whichever is less. Now, this applies only in the arbitration process. This does not in any way impact the level of increase prior to arbitration. Currently, state agencies must bargain with the public employee unions on a laundry list of items, including wages, hours, vacations, insurance, holidays, leaves of absence, shift differentials, overtime compensation, supplemental pay, seniority, transfer procedures, job classifications, health and safety matters, evaluation procedures, procedures for staff reduction, in-service training, and other matters mutually agreed to. Under these mandatory terms of bargaining, school board members, school superintendents, county supervisors, and city officials report great difficulty delivering efficient, smart government. The proposed changes leave bargaining for wages mandatory, but removes the others in order to return to locally elected officials the ability to effectively manage their agency. A number of these previously mandated items can still be a part of collective bargaining if both sides agree, and nothing prevents individual public employees from discussing these issues with management. Items such as transfer procedures and evaluations and staff reductions are performance management tools that locally elected leaders must have to deliver government in the smartest and most efficient way possible. In order to have the kind of on-demand flexibility needed to respond to dynamic situations, these tools are needed by our elected leaders. These reforms also make it possible to reward good employees through pay incentives, and this increases the likelihood of better government and more efficient delivery of services. This is especially important for our school children. These changes will allow school districts, the school boards elected by the people, to reward high-performing teachers while more quickly removing those not meeting acceptable standards. This is a win for the children of Iowa. In a system that has not been reformed in over 40 years, employee organizations have never had to recertify, reducing accountability to their membership. This means that almost all members of these employee organizations have never had the opportunity to cast a vote on their representation. House File 291 corrects that, requiring recertification in the calendar year prior to contract negotiations, with the majority vote of the members of the unit required. Increased accountability and a stronger voice for state employees results from these common sense reforms. House File 291 also recognizes that it is not the responsibility of the taxpayer to collect dues for a union organization that will be sitting across the table from their elected representatives in bargaining. Unlike automatic deductions for nonprofit organizations, unions have a vested interest in collective bargaining negotiations and should collect their own dues. Also, technology has changed since the 1970s, and taxpayers no longer need to be responsible for the collection of union dues. With the technology available today, it is quite simple to have these dues automatically deducted, without the need for taxpayer involvement. Due to the uncontrolled and uncertain environment faced by public safety employees, police and fire, some of these collective bargaining reforms will not apply to them. Police officers and firefighters in uncertain situations must rely on three basic factors to keep them safe: their training. Due to the uncontrolled and uncertain environment faced by public safety employees, police and fire, some of these collective bargaining reforms will not apply to them. Police officers and firefighters in uncertain situations must rely on three basic factors to keep them safe: their training, their alertness, and their equipment. Therefore, it is necessary to leave as mandatory topics of collective bargaining for police officers and firefighters such things as training, shift differentials, and hours, as these can impact their alertness, health and safety matters relating to their equipment, and others. The unique nature of their duties and the uncertain environment in which they operate, absent of OSHA regulations and other protections enjoyed by public employees, makes this necessary. Reforming the arbitration process, reforming the scope of bargaining, creating an election process for accountability, streamlining the process for termination hearings while protecting employee rights, and placing the responsibility for the collection of dues on the union and not the taxpayer are the major changes offered in this bill. Madam Speaker, this concludes my opening remarks, and there are amendments.
Speaker, thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I want to continue to have a good discussion about this bill, HF 291, in a good, constructive, and civil way. I want to thank all public employees across the state. I also want to thank all private employees. I want to thank all employees. They all have a part in making Iowa who we are. I want to focus a little bit on teachers, because I've talked a lot to teachers being part of the Education Committee, so that's been my focus over the last several months. The biggest thing I hear from teachers is this premise of just letting us teach. Teachers have told me, just let us teach. Get all this burdensome and cumbersome Department of Education regulations and all this other stuff out of our way and let us teach. I think that's a great sentiment for all of us to continue to strive for. I've been hearing tonight, this afternoon, a lot of negative perspectives about the atmosphere that this bill potentially presents. That we are demoralizing our teachers, that some teachers even want to leave the state now, that teachers are under assault, that teachers are the enemy, that some teachers don't even want to enter the field. They're just being portrayed a horrible message to teachers, and I just want to say this. I respectfully disagree with my colleagues on this premise. I respectfully disagree, all that are painting this dire picture, because I disagree with it in a lot of ways. With this bill, House File 291, we want passionate teachers who will be recognized for doing a good or a great job in the state of Iowa. We want passionate teachers who love their job and will be recognized for that. That's what I think this bill does. Let's switch the paradigm of thinking to this negativity to something positive about what we can do for teaching here in the state of Iowa. The present system that we have, I think, rewards what I call the lowest common denominator of employees. I've heard that we want to level the playing field, that collective bargaining is the only way to level the playing field. Well, leveling the playing field puts all employees at the same type of atmosphere, makes them all the same. We don't want to do that. We want employees to shine. I understand that. I used to work at a company in Waterloo that packaged oil. We painted our own barrels, and I was in the place where we painted barrels, and I figured out a way to paint the barrels with two hands instead of one, which had never been done. And one of the old-timers in the room said, "Rogers, knock it off. You're making us old guys look bad." Well, we've all heard things like that, haven't we? We've all heard that phrase before when we're doing something, we're excited about it and passionate about it, and we just figured out a better way to do something, and somebody else tells us to slow down. It's making me look bad. That's what a level playing field can do sometimes. That's what an atmosphere of lowest common denominator can do. We don't want that. This bill says that we want great teachers. There's nothing better than seeing somebody working in their sweet spot. I love seeing young people and old people working in their sweet spot. I hired a young guy one time. He was working in advertising, and I went to him and I said, hey, you could work with me working with teenagers. You would be fantastic at it. You're gifted at it. This is what your sweet spot is. And I pulled him away from a pretty lucrative job to this job, convinced him that that was his sweet spot, and he has thrived ever since because it is his sweet spot. He took over my position and has taken that organization farther than I could have. It's such a cool thing to see somebody working in their sweet spot. That's what we want to have happen for teachers in Iowa, is working in a sweet spot. I had a young man who used to work for me, and I convinced him to work in what I would call the perfect place where he could understand his giftedness. He was gifted for this position, and it worked out great. Is there anybody in this room that doesn't think Representative Winchittle doesn't work in a gifted spot when he's a Speaker Pro Tem and he knows all the rules of this place better than anybody else in the room? It's a fantastic gifted spot for somebody like that. I love to see people work it in their giftedness. A level playing field presents fair play like Representative Thiede talked about. But it doesn't allow people to shine in their giftedness. We want teachers to shine. We want teachers to be the best they can possibly be. And that's what we are trying to do with House File 291. Let me tell you a story about a teacher who was in her giftedness. And I talked the other night about a teacher that I knew pretty well, and that was my mother. And I got a letter from somebody who worked with her, and I've carried this around with me ever since I've had it. And this letter is from Reverend Alvin Huring from Belmont, Iowa, St. Francis Xavier Church. And he says this to my family. This was 1974. Remember, my mother was a public school teacher in a public elementary, Jewett in Evansdale. The letter says this: Dear Walt and children, Walt was my father's name also. Please accept my sincere sympathy to the death of your good wife and mother. My mom passed away when I was 13. Kate was her name. Kate was a very singular woman. To think that she would go off to college with a large family at home, complete her requirements for a teaching degree, and then teach is something almost unheard of and unknown in 1974. Actually, this would have been 1967. She was a woman of great practical intellect. I remember the fine input she provided for the St. Nicholas School Board. When she spoke, the others listened, since they knew that Kate had so much good to offer. I remember your family well and hope this letter reaches you okay despite the lack of complete address. I ask the Lord to take care of all of you in his kind embrace and grant eternal rest and peace to the soul of Kate. With all best wishes to you, and ask health and peace for you. I am sincerely yours in Christ, Father Alvin Huring. That's the kind of teacher we want here in Iowa. And I want to tell teachers all over the state, don't listen to this negativity. We want to present a place where you can shine. Where you can shine. And we want teachers to come to Iowa where you can shine and work in your giftedness, where you can be your best. That's what this bill is about. That's what this bill is about. I thank you for listening, and thank you, Madam Speaker.
We are here tonight, obviously late. Thank you all for being here and staying late. Thank you, everybody in the galleries as well, for being here tonight. This is a very important decision that we are all going to make in the next couple of days. I am one of those new members of the Assembly that has been referenced several times here tonight, and this is not a decision that I'm taking lightly either. Representative Steckman referenced a poll earlier tonight from the Simon Conway radio show on WHO. It was on the web. That was a non-scientific internet poll. Now, I'm a former journalist. I'm a researcher. I dug for data. I work for a research company now, Franken, Magid and Associates, and we do research with strict standards, both quantitative and qualitative. And that poll, Representative Steckman, was not scientific. I found one that did meet those strict standards. It was actually commissioned by the state of Iowa. It was done by Aon Hewitt, a respected consulting company nationwide. This report blended compensation data with benefit analysis. In a broad look at our state's public workers, Aon Hewitt's study found that the state of Iowa's average base pay was significantly above market. Significantly above market. Several jobs were in fact more than 20% above market when looking at actual base pay. Aon Hewitt found the state of Iowa's average base pay is significantly higher than the public sector market median. They factored in things like geography, job description, duties, industry, organizational size of the employer, in this case, the state of Iowa. It also found that the state of Iowa's total compensation, including benefits, were considerably above market. In fact, that number was on average 12.8% higher than what the market says that we should be making. So why does that matter? This report also lays out the goals on how to make sure we better align as a state with what the market should bear. The report did part of that. We have redesigned some of the benefits programs. We have brought those more in line with market after this was issued. But what we haven't been able to do is the second part of that. Reduce or eliminate increases to base pay over time for the employees who are paid significantly above market value. Now, this report, importantly, does not suggest reducing pay by cutting it. I want to make that very clear. Instead, they just say to control the pay increases. Control. We have not been able to do that because of the current collective bargaining system. So this bill will make sure that those who might fall below market are able to earn what they should. And those who are above it should be held at market until they are better aligned with the market. That's what this report suggests. Now, it is not a one-size-fits-all approach either. They recommended looking at tenure, experience, performance, all things that would be permissible in our approach to collective bargaining in this bill. Representative Hunter, you also mentioned tonight that we needed to weight Iowa as a low-wage state. This study did that. It considered a 5% reduction for the state of Iowa when they looked at national data. I want to add a personal note here. My mother was a teacher, an art teacher. She was a guidance counselor in an elementary school. She supports this bill. I have a kindergartner and a child who will be in preschool next year. I've had many conversations with teachers, our school board members, and even just today, the superintendents of two of the districts in my area. I support this bill. This is a good bill. This is good policy. I urge my caucus to vote down this amendment and vote yes on this bill. Thank you.